They lied to you. Transformation isn't a self-care trend or a productivity hack. It's a brutal, sacred initiation. And Jung knew this better than anyone. While the world sells comfort, he offered confrontation. Not with society, but with yourself. You've been told to heal by avoiding pain, to find purpose without struggle, to numb yourself with distractions labeled as growth. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if your suffering is the gateway to meaning? And the voice calling from within isn't madness, but your buried Messiah. This isn't another motivational speech. It's a descent into the archetypal fire. In Aion, Jung reveals what most therapists and spiritual influencers are too afraid to say. The journey toward wholeness demands you face evil, walk with the shadow, and resurrect the divine child you've abandoned. You don't just work on yourself. You're pulled into a mythic struggle between the ego and the self, the human and the transcendent. And you either accept the transformation or spend your life avoiding it while calling it growth. So if you're done with the half-truths, the nihilistic philosophies that leave you hollow, and the ideologies that erase your soul in the name of progress, this is your turning point. Because what you're about to uncover isn't just psychology. It's prophecy. It's redemption. It's war. And the battlefield, it's your mind. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Transformation and the Archetype of the Hero. Transformation doesn't come neatly packaged with instructions. It arrives like a storm and demands you either sink or rise. Jung taught us that true change requires engaging with deep archetypes buried in the unconscious. And one of the most primal is the hero. This isn't about capes or swords. It's about standing up when your legs shake, about facing the beast within. The so-called Chad kangaroo metaphor might sound humorous, but it captures something real, raw, muscular vitality that emerges from struggle. And guess what? The kangaroo only becomes strong by fighting, just like you. People want to change their lives, but many are too comfortable staying wounded. The hero's journey isn't just a story. It's a psychological process of individuation. You leave your safe space, confront chaos, suffer deeply, and return with something sacred, wisdom. In that chaos, the ego shatters so the self can emerge. It's why hitting rock bottom often precedes the greatest transformations. That job loss, that breakup, that existential collapse, it might be the dragon you were born to slay. Let me give you a real example. Read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He faced the horror of concentration camps and didn't become bitter. He became larger than life. That's the hero. You don't need a tragedy to begin your journey, but you do need to stop avoiding the one you're already in. Facing your own fears, starting a business, committing to therapy, or even just journaling every morning. These are the first steps on your mythic path. At the core of this heroic transformation lies suffering. Jung never sugarcoated it. Transformation hurts. It strips away illusions and false identities. But within that suffering is the alchemical fire that forges the self. The pain isn't pointless. It's meaningful, if you're willing to make it so. That's the deal. Transcend your weakness, or remain a prisoner to it. And trust me, no one rescues you. That's your job. The hero's journey begins when you stop waiting and start walking, limping if you must. And if you're wondering what comes after that moment of heroic awakening, when the pain becomes purpose and the chaos starts making sense, you're not alone. Because that's when a deeper figure enters the myth, one far older and more luminous than the hero, the Messiah. But he doesn't arrive like you expect him to. Chapter 2. Christ and the Archetype of the Messiah. Now he enters sacred territory. While the hero fights dragons, the Messiah walks into the fire willingly, for others. Christ isn't just a religious figure. He's the blueprint for psychological transcendence. In Jungian terms, he embodies the full integration of opposites, divine and human, suffering and redemption, ego and self. The Christ archetype whispers a deeper transformation than strength. It invites sacrifice. And that's where most people hesitate. Power? Sure. Fame? Maybe. But suffering for something greater? That's rare. Individuation, in this context, mirrors the Messiah's path. Christ embraced the cross not as defeat, but as initiation. It's the same when someone faces moral suffering and still chooses what's right, even if it costs them. A whistleblower, an abused person breaking a generational cycle, someone forgiving the unforgivable, all channel the Messiah archetype. They don't just grow, they redeem. They carry the sins of others, not out of weakness, but because their soul has become strong enough to do so. Here's the paradox. You become whole not by avoiding wounds, but by bearing them consciously. Christ bleeds so others may heal. What a terrifying standard. Yet, that's the invitation. You start realizing this when you're no longer chasing self-improvement for your own glory, but for the sake of your family, your community, your future children. Jung saw this clearly. The Messiah isn't an escape from humanity, but the perfection of it. Not in avoiding the world, but in embracing it fully, pain and all. We live in a culture obsessed with self-optimization, but allergic to self-sacrifice. The Messiah archetype confronts that head-on. It says, yes, evolve, but evolve to serve. You see it in every therapist who listens to sorrow daily, every artist who exposes their soul, every parent who shows up even when exhausted. The real transformation isn't from weak to strong, it's from separate to united. And Christ shows us how to walk that razor's edge between individuality and universal love. But even the Messiah began as something else, something small, fragile, and filled with untapped potential. That's the beauty of the next archetype, the divine child. Because before you can carry a cross, you must be willing to dream again. Chapter 3. The Divine Child and the Need for a Hero. There's something sacred about beginnings. Jung called the divine child a symbol of psychic renewal, a glimpse into the unspoiled self before it's wounded by life. And while the hero must fight and the Messiah must sacrifice, the divine child simply is. Pure potential. It appears in dreams, myths, and even your imagination when you dare to wonder, what if? This archetype isn't naive, it's necessary. Without it, transformation dies before it starts. The child holds the seed of the future. Think about it. Every great person started as someone who believed they could become more. The divine child isn't just an infant in a manger. It's the moment you choose to dream despite the ruins around you. It's every teenager who wants to change the world before cynicism sets in. It's every addict who believes one day of sobriety might become two. That spark of hope, that's the child calling. And if you kill it, you kill your future. That's why antinatalism is so insidious. Antinatalism, with its icy logic, says it's better never to be born than to suffer. But what it really does is deny the archetype of the child altogether. No Christ in the crib. No future worth fighting for. No rebirth. And while it may sound rational, it's actually a spiritual dead end. Because when a society gives up on children, literal or symbolic, it gives up on itself. It loses the capacity to imagine better days. And where there's no vision, there's only collapse. Real transformation starts with honoring this archetype. Protect it in yourself. Nurture it in others. If you're mentoring someone, you're feeding the child within them. If you're starting a project despite fear, you're believing in the child within you. And if you've become too jaded, go read The Little Prince, or sit in silence and ask, what did I love before the world told me to be realistic? That's not nostalgia, it's reconnection. The divine child is timeless. But here's the catch. The child needs a hero to become. Left unprotected, it withers. And in a world where belief is under siege and meaning evaporates like mist, what happens to the child when society itself starts slipping into darkness? That's when the real crisis begins, the one named nihilism. Chapter 4: Nihilism, Antinatalism, and the Crisis of Meaning. When meaning collapses, everything becomes negotiable: truth, values, even life itself. That's the silent plague of nihilism. It doesn't scream or break things. It just whispers, "What's the point?" And if that voice settles in, it devours the soul from the inside out. Jung saw this not as a philosophical quirk, but as a full-blown psychological emergency. The absence of meaning isn't neutral, it's destructive. And when societies embrace it, they lose their grip on transformation, identity, and the future. Antinatalism is nihilism's sidekick. It dresses itself in logic and compassion, but beneath that polished exterior lies deep despair. Saying life isn't worth starting is the ultimate surrender to suffering. It throws away the archetype of the divine child, erases the Messiah, and scoffs at the hero. What remains? A sterile world, too afraid to hurt and too numb to grow. It's not just anti-birth, it's anti-hope. And when that worldview spreads, you start seeing generations that fear creation more than destruction. You've probably met people like this: hyper-intelligent, emotionally paralyzed, philosophically exhausted. They read Nietzsche, but skipped the part where he demands we overcome the void, not wallow in it. They quote Camus yet refuse to rebel joyfully against absurdity. These aren't villains. They're uninitiated souls stuck between pain and purpose. What they need isn't more argument, it's initiation. They need a reason to suffer nobly. And that, my friend, only comes from encountering something sacred again. If you've ever felt like life is meaningless, you're not broken, you're waking up. That's your call to the inner journey. Don't run. Start reading the myths. Revisit man's search for meaning, Aion, or even the Gospels. Not to be religious, but to rediscover pattern and purpose. Go outside, talk to elders, learn from someone who survived real darkness and still believes in light. Meaning doesn't come from thinking, it comes from choosing. Choosing to believe, build, and bear burdens with dignity. And yet, in some circles, bearing burdens isn't fashionable. There's another ideology that rose from ashes, promising to fix everything from the top down while quietly erasing the soul. It sounds noble, but underneath its utopian mask hides a deep suspicion of the individual: communism. Chapter 5: The Anti-Human Agenda. Marx once dreamed of a classless society, but what emerged from that dream was something far darker than most anticipated. Communism, in its purest theory, speaks of equality, but in practice, it often crushes the individual under the weight of collective abstraction. Jung saw this danger clearly. When a system dismisses the uniqueness of the self, it invites psychological flattening. The result? A spiritual desert, where the transformation of the individual is sacrificed on the altar of social uniformity. In psychological terms, communism denies individuation. It doesn't believe in the hero's journey. It believes in central planning. The individual isn't a potential messiah or divine child. They're just a cog in a predetermined system. And while it claims to liberate, it often imprisons the psyche in rigid ideology. Identity becomes political. Archetypes are erased or rewritten. God is dethroned, not by science, but by bureaucracy. What's left is a hollow shell where obedience replaces meaning and control replaces freedom. Let's be clear. The critique here isn't about economics. It's about soul. Systems like Marxism often fail to recognize that people aren't programmable units. They're mythic beings in search of transcendence. That's why these ideologies often lead to psychological warfare, indoctrination, repression, erasure of the past. Think of the Cultural Revolution, where entire traditions were burned to make way for a better tomorrow. But a future built on the ashes of identity is no future at all. It's spiritual genocide. In many ways, this anti-human agenda is a response to suffering without transformation. Communism promises justice without the cross. It seeks redemption without the Redeemer. But any system that denies the shadow denies the process of integration. Jung would say that what you repress returns with vengeance. And in these regimes, it often does, through purges, paranoia, and collapse. If you want to transform the world, you must first transform the soul. There's no shortcut. And yet, buried within even the most dogmatic traditions, there's still the whisper of spirit, an ancient tension between good and evil. It's in Christianity where this battle is framed most clearly. But does it go deep enough to meet the psychological truths we carry in the unconscious? Chapter 6. Christianity's concept of evil and psychological wholeness. For centuries, Christianity has defined evil as privatio boni, the absence of good. It's a neat theological formula, but Jung wasn't buying it. He argued that evil isn't just a void, it's a presence, a force, something real and rooted deep in the human psyche. And when we refuse to face it, we don't become more spiritual. We become more fragmented. You can't conquer what you won't confront. And in that avoidance, the ego splits from the self, and true transformation stalls. Every time someone represses their anger, jealousy, or lust in the name of being good, they feed the shadow. The result isn't holiness, it's hypocrisy. Jung said the unconscious doesn't care about appearances. It wants integration, not perfection. And that means dragging the demons into the daylight, not pretending they don't exist. The Messiah embraced his cross. But how many of us deny we even carry one? That's the problem. Evil doesn't vanish when ignored. It festers. Take, for example, the scandals in religious institutions. These aren't anomalies. They're symptoms. When a system denies the reality of evil as an inner force, it projects it outward. The devil becomes out there, and inner accountability dies. That's why individuation is so crucial. It forces a man to stop pointing fingers and start asking hard questions. What darkness lives in me? Where am I lying? That's not blasphemy. It's the beginning of wholeness. And ironically, it brings us closer to God than denial ever will. Christ's real power wasn't in moral superiority. It was in his psychological depth. He wept. He raged. He endured temptation. And he transformed it all into love. That's the model. Not sinlessness, but self-awareness. Not repression, but integration. If Christianity embraced Jung's depth psychology fully, it could evolve into something far more potent. A system that heals not by fear, but by light. Evil wouldn't be an external threat. It would be a call to inner work. And maybe that's what the future needs. Not more dogma, but more depth. Because in a world drifting into confusion, depression, and disconnection, what people crave isn't doctrine. It's transformation. They want a reason to live again. A vision. A path toward wholeness that actually works. And that begins by reclaiming the most radical belief of all, that the future is still worth building. Chapter 7. Future and Psychological Health. When someone gives up on the future, something inside them dies. That spark, the one that once believed in possibility, flickers out. Jung knew that psychological health isn't about comfort. It's about direction. The self doesn't thrive in stasis. It needs movement, orientation, a goal beyond ego gratification. Without a vision of transformation, people fall into despair, addiction, or numb routines. And when a society loses that vision collectively, you start seeing epidemics of anxiety and meaninglessness. Here's the truth most therapists won't say out loud. Healing isn't just about processing the past. It's about building a future. You can journal all day about your childhood, but if you don't choose who you're becoming, you stay stuck. That's why archetypes matter. The hero gives you a path. The Messiah gives you purpose. The divine child gives you hope. These symbols aren't fantasies. They're psychological GPS. They guide the unconscious toward wholeness. And without them, you drift. Want practical steps? Start with structure. Create a daily ritual that reminds you of who you want to become. Read Aion with a notebook in hand, mapping your own transformation. Talk to people who carry vision, not just opinions. Surround yourself with art, literature, and relationships that reflect the future you desire. It's not about perfection. It's about alignment. Every choice becomes a vote for the kind of self you're crafting. Even how you speak to yourself shapes the architecture of your becoming. And let's not forget, transformation isn't linear. You'll backslide, forget, sabotage. That's part of it. Psychological health isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up faster each time. You fall less in despair when you know your fall has meaning. The unconscious speaks in symbols, not spreadsheets. So nurture symbols that point forward. Revisit the dreams you buried. The world doesn't need more machines. It needs people on fire with vision. People who carry light into systems, families, and futures still forming. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most radical act left in this cynical age. To believe. To look at the chaos around you and still choose to grow. Because the archetype of transformation isn't about escaping reality. It's about transcending it from within. And that's where the real work begins. Conclusion. Are you living your myth or someone else's script? You've made it this far for a reason. Not because you're curious, but because some part of you is ready. Ready to break free from the lifeless roles, the empty ideologies, the numb existence of the crowd. Jung didn't offer quick fixes. He offered fire. He showed that inside each of us lives a story more powerful than trauma, more ancient than fear. So now ask yourself, are you living your myth or someone else's script? Are you transforming or just decorating the prison of your ego? Maybe it's time to stop waiting for external permission and start confronting your inner contradictions. What are you still refusing to integrate? Where are you still lying to yourself in the name of being good? And what would happen if you let go of the safe answers and stepped into the chaos of becoming? Because here's the secret. Transformation won't ask if you're ready. It'll demand that you become ready or be broken trying. And sometimes being broken is the first real step. So take a breath, look inward, then take action. Pick up Aion. Journal the dreams you've ignored. Seek out the archetypes whispering from your unconscious. And if this message sparks something in you, don't let it die. Subscribe, turn on the notifications, and join us on this path through fire, shadow, and light. This isn't just a video. It's your invitation to evolve.